When my dad passed away, the will was read in Hawaii, where the family mansion stood like a monument to everything I had lost. My stepmother Vivienne inherited it all: the house, the fortune, the life that should have been shared. And me, I was left with nothing but a cabin tucked deep in the Oregon woods. She leaned close, her smile sharp as glass, and told me trash like me belonged in that shack. Broken and humiliated, I packed my bags, flew across the ocean, and drove into the misty forest toward the cabin I barely remembered from childhood. I thought I was walking into exile, but the moment I opened that creaking door, I realized I had stepped into something far more dangerous. What was waiting inside would not only change the story of my family, it would change me forever. The reading of the will had felt like a staged play where every line was meant to humiliate me. I sat there in a stiff leather chair, my palms damp against my lap, trying to appear calm while my insides twisted. The lawyer spoke in a flat tone, reading off line after line, but the words clanged in my ears like heavy iron doors slamming shut. Vivienne's face was perfectly composed, every hair in place, every detail of her outfit screaming control. My face burned as the lawyer declared her the owner of the Rossi mansion in Honolulu, the place I had once run barefoot through as a little girl. Then he spoke my name, and my body tensed, clinging to hope. What I received was not a share of the house, not part of the company, not even a trust. A cabin, just a cabin in Oregon. Vivienne leaned close enough that only I could hear her perfume cloying, her whisper sharp. Trash like you belongs in that shack. I held my breath, trying not to let her see the crack forming inside me. I pressed my nails into my palm until they stung, forcing myself not to cry. When the session ended, Vivienne rose with elegance, thanking the lawyer with a gracious nod, as though she were the grieving widow, holding the world on her shoulders. I stood up on shaking legs and walked out, the sun over Honolulu glaring down like a cruel spotlight. I watched her slip into a sleek black limousine while I stood alone beside a giant rental car heat shimmering on the pavement. I don't remember much of the drive to the airport, only the way my chest ached and how the world blurred through my tears. At the terminal, I bought a ticket to Portland, Oregon. The clerk's polite smile was a small mercy in a day filled with coldness. Hours later, as the plane lifted off, I stared out the window. The island faded into the horizon, the Pacific stretching wide and endless, as if I was leaving behind not just land but the remnants of whatever family I once had. When we landed in Portland, rain streaked the windows. The sky hung low and gray, so different from Hawaii's sun. I picked up my rental car and followed the directions toward Mount Hood. The drive was long, winding past small towns and into thick forest. The air smelled of wet pine, the road glistening with rain. My heart pounded harder with every mile, dread and memory tangling together. The cabin appeared out of the mist at the end of a gravel drive. Its wooden siding was weathered, the porch steps uneven, the roof sagging slightly at the edges. For a moment, I sat in the car staring at it. This was what I had been given in place of the mansion, the gardens, the wealth. A forgotten cabin surrounded by silence. Vivienne's words echoed in my head. Trash like you. I clenched the keys in my fist, the edges digging into my skin. My chest tightened, a storm of anger and humiliation swirling inside me. At last, I forced myself to open the car door and step out. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes. I climbed the porch steps, the boards creaking under my weight. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The door groaned as it opened, the smell of dust and damp wood filling my lungs. Inside, the air was cold and stale, untouched for years. Furniture sat under sheets' corners draped in cobwebs, light seeping through cracked curtains. I stepped inside, my breath visible in the cool air. Every sound felt amplified. The floorboards creaked under my steps. My hand brushed against the wooden wall, rough beneath my fingertips. Memories seeped in faint but sharp. My dad's voice calling me from the porch. My mother humming in the kitchen, laughter echoing near the fire. My throat tightened. This was no shack. This had been a home once full of love before everything fell apart. I walked from room to room, taking in the silence. Dust clung to the window panes. An old armchair sagged near the fireplace, covered in a white sheet like a ghost. Something pulled me toward the hearth, an instinct I couldn't name. I crouched, running my hand along the stone base. My fingers caught on an edge that didn't feel right. One of the stones shifted under my touch. My pulse quickened. I pressed again. The stone loosened and slid aside, revealing a narrow hollow. My breath caught as I reached inside, fingertips brushing against wood. Slowly, I pulled out a small box wrapped in cloth, dust falling from it like it had waited years in silence. I set it on the table, staring at it in the pale light filtering through the curtains. My hands shook as I untied the cloth. For a long moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This cabin had been given to me as an insult, but something inside told me it held more than Vivian could ever guess. I lifted the lid, and in that instant, I knew the story of my inheritance was only beginning. The box sat in front of me on the wooden table, its cloth unwrapped, its surface rough with age. My hands hovered over it, trembling as though it might burn me if I touched it too long. The air in the cabin felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. For a moment, I almost closed it back up, shoved it into the hollow where I had found it, and walked away. But curiosity pressed harder than fear. I lifted the lid. Inside were faded papers yellowed with time, and a stack of photographs bound together with twine. The sight of them made my breath hitch. On top lay a folded letter, the paper delicate, the handwriting instantly recognizable even after all these years. It was my mother's. My throat closed, my eyes blurred. She had been gone since I was a teenager, taken too early by illness. I had spent years aching for her voice, her smell, her gentle touch. And now, here, hidden in a cabin I had almost believed was worthless, she had left me a message. I sat back, clutching the letter. My fingers traced her name written in looping script. For a long time, I just stared, afraid that reading it would shatter me all over again. Finally, I tore the envelope open with shaking hands. Kiara, my beloved daughter. If you are reading this, it means your dad and I could not give you the protection we wished for. I worry that Vivian will try to push you aside, that she will make you believe you are not worthy. Do not let her lies stain your spirit. Your dad and I built more than wealth. We built something we hoped you would carry on. Trust in yourself. You are stronger than you know. Tears fell freely down my cheeks as I read the words blurring. I pressed the paper to my chest, rocking slightly, as if holding her again. I whispered into the silence, I miss you, Mom. God, I miss you. I forced myself to continue reading. Beneath the letter were documents with my dad's handwriting scrawled across, the margins, budgets, proposals, drafts of what looked like a charitable foundation. Notes about using this cabin as its first home, a place of shelter for children and women who had no place to go. My chest tightened as realization dawned. This cabin was never meant to be an insult. It had been part of a dream. I shuffled through the photographs next. My mother smiling beside the cabin, her hair loose, her arms open. My dad holding me on his shoulders, his eyes soft, full of pride. Another photo showed my mother in a classroom surrounded by children. They looked so alive, so full of hope. I laid them all out on the table, my tears dripping onto the wood. For years I had thought I was abandoned, erased from my dad's heart by Vivian's poison. But these papers, this letter told a different story. My parents had not forgotten me. They had trusted me even after death to carry their legacy. A sharp knock startled me. I jumped heart-hammering. For a moment I thought maybe it was Vivian come to snatch even this from me. I wiped my face, quickly, slid the papers back into the box, and crossed the room. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch. He was tall, middle-aged, wearing a rain jacket darkened by drizzle. He held a clipboard under one arm. His expression was polite but guarded. "Evening, miss. Name's Carter. I'm with the Forestry Service. Just doing rounds, making sure cabins out here are safe. Haven't seen this one occupied in years." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. I just inherited it. My dad owned it. He nodded slowly, glancing past me into the dim cabin. "Well, glad to see it in use again. Weather can be rough this time of year. Watch the chimney gets clogged easy." He tipped his hat and stepped back. "Thank you," I said softly. He walked down the steps and disappeared into the mist, leaving me shaken. The world outside this cabin didn't know what secrets it held. That thought both comforted and unsettled me. As night deepened, I tried to sleep in the old bedroom upstairs, but my mind spun. Vivian's face haunted me, her cruel whisper echoing, "Trash like you." But now I had something she didn't know existed. Something that could change everything. The next morning I drove into town, stopping at a small cafe for coffee. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly, her gray hair tied back, her eyes kind. "First time here, honey?" "Yes," I admitted. "Just came up from Portland. Well, welcome to Mount Hood country. You'll like it here once you settle in." Her kindness almost undid me. I thanked her and carried my coffee to a table near the window. Outside, the town was small but alive, people moving about in the drizzle with purpose. I wondered if they had any idea who I was, or what storm brewed just beyond their quiet streets. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stay out of what isn't yours. You'll regret it." My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I looked around the cafe, half expecting Vivian to walk in. She was behind this, of course. Somehow, she already knew I had come here. She wanted to scare me back into silence, but instead of retreating, anger surged. For years, she had tried to make me feel small. Now I had proof she was afraid of me. I sipped my coffee, steadying my breath, and whispered under it, "You picked the wrong fight, Vivian." I drove back to the cabin with new determination. I pulled out my mother's letter again, reading it slowly. "Trust in yourself. You are stronger than you know." Her words filled me with courage. I spent the afternoon cleaning, sweeping away cobwebs, dusting furniture, scrubbing the counters until they shone. With each stroke of the rag, the cabin transformed from a place of exile into a place of possibility. My mother's dream would not die here. I would make sure of it. As dusk fell, I lit a fire in the hearth. Flames danced across the walls, casting the cabin in a warm glow. I sat at the table, the box open before me, and whispered to the empty room, "I will finish what you started, I promise." But in the silence that followed, the warning text still echoed in my mind. Someone was watching me, and I knew Vivian would not stop until she destroyed me. I stared into the fire, the weight of both fear and determination pressing on my chest. The cabin had given me hope, but it had also opened a door to a dangerous battle I could no longer avoid. I woke up the next morning with the image of that metal box still burned into my mind. The letter from my dad, the documents, the recordings, they had shifted everything I thought I knew about what was left behind. The night before, I had carefully returned the box to its place under the floor, covering the outline with the rug as if nothing had been disturbed. Still, I barely slept, half expecting headlights to sweep across the cabin windows, half convinced Vivian somehow knew already. The forest outside was silent, but the silence felt tense, like the trees were keeping a secret with me. I brewed coffee again, the bitter scent filling the small room. As I sipped, I thought about my next steps. I could not rush to confront Vivian, not without understanding exactly what I held. The papers were dense, full of numbers and legal language that I struggled to parse. But the names stood out: Rossi Real Estate Group, Board of Directors, ownership percentages. In those neat stacks of paper, my dad had outlined his real legacy, and it was not the Hawaii mansion. It was power control, and proof that Vivian and Daniel had manipulated everything. After breakfast, I carried the box back onto the table and spread the papers out one by one. The cabin felt smaller with the weight of them around me. One document confirmed that my dad still owned nearly half of the company's shares at the time of his death. Another included signed statements of intent that those shares were to be transferred to me, not Vivian. My heart raced as I realized the implications. If these papers were legitimate and still valid, then on paper I was not just an outcast with a shack in the woods. I was the rightful owner of a fortune Vivian thought she had secured. I traced my finger over my dad's signature. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on every birthday card, every note he had left me on the fridge. This was not forged. My chest tightened with a mix of pride and sorrow. He had trusted me, hidden this from the woman he had once married, and placed it where only I could find it. But fear crawled in alongside hope. Why had he not told me sooner? Why leave me with this burden alone? Perhaps he had run out of time. Perhaps Vivian had prevented him. Whatever the reason, I was left holding the pieces of a puzzle that could either destroy me or save me. As I flipped through another folder, I found transcripts from recorded conversations. One in particular stopped me cold. It described a discussion between Vivian and a lawyer not listed on any official documents. She had pressured him to draft a new will while my dad was hospitalized, limiting my access and strengthening her position. My throat went dry as I read the words. My dad had known. He had collected proof, but he had been too weak to fight her directly. So he had hidden it here in a cabin everyone thought was worthless. I sat back, the papers spread before me like shards of glass. My mind replayed Vivian's smirk, the way she had leaned in at the lawyer's office calling me trash. Rage rose hot and sharp. She had no idea what was waiting in these woods. Still, rage alone would not help me. I needed a plan, and I needed allies. But who could I trust? Most of the people who had surrounded my dad in his last years had been handpicked by Vivian. I had no way of knowing who was loyal to me or even neutral. My stomach twisted as I realized how isolated I truly was. That afternoon I stepped outside to breathe. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest damp and glistening. Sunlight filtered through the branches, and somewhere in the distance a bird called. For a moment I let the cool air fill my lungs. Despite the weight of what I carried, the cabin still offered a strange peace, as if my mother's spirit lingered here. I thought of her again, how she would want me to be strong, how she would never let anyone take my dignity without a fight. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, studying the ground, half expecting to see footprints from whoever had been maintaining the place. The earth was soft from the rain, but I found nothing fresh. Whoever had been here had vanished long before I arrived. The mystery gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I had more pressing concerns. That evening, as the light faded, I sat by the small fireplace, papers piled beside me, the quilt around my shoulders. I imagined Vivian at the mansion in Hawaii, sipping wine on the veranda, convinced she had triumphed. I pictured Daniel in his expensive suit, already planning what he would do with the fortune he believed was his. And I pictured myself alone in a cabin but holding the truth. The contrast stung, yet it also gave me strength. I knew I could not hide forever. At some point, I would have to step out of these woods and face them. But not yet. Not until I understood every page, every signature, every clause. Not until I knew exactly how to wield the power my dad had left me. As night closed in, I tucked the documents back into the metal box, slid it beneath the floorboards, and lowered the rug over it. My body ached with fatigue, but my mind would not rest. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Vivian's sneer, heard her words again. Trash like you? She thought she had buried me in shame. She thought the cabin was my prison. She had no idea it was my weapon. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of standing before her, papers in hand, her face crumbling as the truth unraveled. The dream felt so vivid that when I woke in the pale morning light, I whispered to myself, soon. I poured another cup of coffee, staring out the window as mist curled through the trees. The cabin no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like a starting line. I did not know exactly how, but I knew one day I would walk out of here stronger than I had ever been, ready to face the woman who had tried to erase me. The knock at the cabin door startled me so badly that I nearly dropped the cup of coffee I was holding. It was mid-morning, the sun slanting through the trees, and I had been studying the documents again, trying to map out what they all meant. My heart jumped as I froze in place. No one should know I was here. For a moment I considered pretending I was not home, but the knock came again. Louder this time, insistent. I set the cup down and walked to the door. My pulse thudded in my ears as I pulled it open. Vivienne stood on this porch in a cream-colored coat, her hair perfect as always, her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Beside her loomed Daniel, arms crossed, his gaze sweeping the cabin as if it already belonged to him. Behind them, a black car idled on the dirt path, a man in a suit waiting at the wheel. Well, Kiara, Vivienne said, her voice smooth as silk. I thought I would pay you a visit. How are you adjusting to your new home? Her eyes darted past me into the cabin, sharp and searching. I blocked the doorway with my body gripping the frame. I am fine, I answered flatly. What are you doing here? Daniel snorted, shaking his head. Just checking in on the family's stray. He leaned casually against the porch railing. Not much of a place, is it? You could do better, but then again, maybe not. I clenched my jaw. I had spent nights replaying his smirk at the reading of the will, and now it was in front of me again. I forced myself to stay calm. Vivienne's smile widened. No need for hostility. We only came to make you an offer. Her hand dipped into her purse and she pulled out a folder. Inside are documents for you to sign, a clean solution for everyone. You give up whatever vague claim you think you have to your dad's estate, and in return we provide you with a generous sum. You will be free to live your life without all this unpleasantness. She held the folder out to me like she was offering a gift. I did not take it. Instead, I asked quietly, "And if I refuse?" Her eyes hardened. "Then you will learn how very small you are compared to us." Her voice dropped, no longer coated in sugar. Daniel stepped closer, his height casting a shadow over me. "Do yourself a favor, Kiara. Sign the papers. Walk away. You are not built for this world. You will be crushed." Heat rose in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I thought of the documents hidden under the floor, the proof my dad had trusted me with. They had no idea. Not yet. I shook my head slowly. I am not signing anything. Vivienne's jaw tightened. She shoved the folder back into her purse. Very well. Do not say I did not try to make this easy. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the porch. Daniel lingered, smirking. You are going to regret this, he said before following her to the car. I closed the door, my hands shaking. I leaned against it, breath coming fast. They knew, or at least they suspected, the timing was too perfect. I had only just uncovered the hidden box, and now they were here with legal papers and threats. My dad's warning echoed in my mind. Do not trust them. Guard what mattered most. I paced the cabin, anger and fear swirling inside me. They had expected me to fold, to sign away everything for a quick payout. That was their way, crushing me under their confidence. But I was not the weak girl they remembered. Not anymore. I sat at the table, staring at the letter from my dad again. His words steadied me. He had seen this coming. He had known Vivienne would stoop to manipulation. That was why he had left the truth here, for me. That afternoon, I decided to test my strength. I took out one of the property deeds from the box and examined it carefully. It clearly showed ownership in my name with his signature verified. My hands tingled as I imagined presenting it in court. Watching Vivian's perfect mask shatter, the thought filled me with both courage and dread. If she realized I had this kind of proof, she would not stop until she ripped it from me. I locked the documents away again and walked outside. The forest was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of pine. My footsteps crunched on the damp earth as I circled the clearing. I needed to clear my head to breathe. I thought of my mother again, how she had never backed down from what was right even when it cost her. She would tell me to fight. She would remind me that dignity could not be bought. When I returned to the cabin, I found an envelope slipped under the door. My stomach dropped. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Scrawled across it in bold letters were the words, "You will regret this." No signature, no explanation, just those 4 words. My hands trembled as I read it again. I sank into the chair, heart pounding. They wanted to scare me to push me into surrender. But fear curdled into fury. I tucked the note into my journal and whispered to myself, "No. You will regret underestimating me." That night, I sat by the fire, the box safe beneath the floorboards, my mind racing with possibilities. The confrontation had left me shaken, but it had also revealed something important. They were nervous. If they had been completely confident in their victory, they would not have come all the way to Oregon to pressure me. They feared what I might have. They feared the truth. I leaned back, staring into the flames. The cabin creaked softly around me, a reminder that even in solitude I was not powerless. The documents were real. The threat was real. And for the first time since my dad's death, I felt a spark of control returning to my life. As the fire crackled and shadows danced across the walls, I knew this was only the beginning of the battle. But I also knew one thing with certainty. I would not be bullied into silence. The phone rang late the next morning while I was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread before me like a shield. The sound startled me so much that I nearly spilled the coffee in my hand. Hardly anyone had my number here. My stomach twisted as I picked up the receiver. A calm female voice introduced herself as Eleanor Hayes, my dad's longtime attorney from Seattle. She said she had been trying to reach me since the will was read, but had been blocked at every turn. When she learned I was at the cabin, she decided to call directly. I listened, gripping the phone tightly, unsure whether to trust her. She asked if I was all right and whether I understood what had been left to me. I hesitated before answering. I knew she could be a lifeline, but she might also be a danger if Vivian had already gotten to her. Still, something in her voice steadied me. She did not sound like the people who had circled Vivian's table, waiting for scraps. She sounded weary but resolute. I told her I had found papers and a letter from my dad, that I believed he had hidden them to protect me. There was a long silence before she spoke again. "I suspected as much," she said. "Your dad confided in me before his health declined. He feared Vivian would manipulate him into rewriting everything. He said he had a plan, but he never told me the details. If you found something, then it is vital that we keep it safe." The confirmation both relieved and terrified me. It meant my dad had not acted out of confusion or weakness. He had fought for me until the end. I felt a swell of grief, then anger. Eleanor asked if I would meet her in Portland so she could review the documents. My instinct screamed caution, but I also knew I could not stay hidden forever. I told her I would think about it and call her back. After I hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the silent phone. The world outside this cabin suddenly felt closer, pressing in. I remembered Vivian's visit, the unsigned threat left under my door. If she realized Eleanor was still loyal to me, she would come after her too. That afternoon, as the clouds gathered, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Again. I froze. Through the window, I saw Daniel's car pull into the clearing. My chest tightened. He stepped out alone this time, dressed in a sleek jacket, his expression more calculated than mocking. He carried a folder under his arm. I opened the door before he could knock. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharper than I felt inside. He looked me up and down, his smile thin. "To talk," he said. "No threats, no games. Just business. May I come in?" I hesitated, but stepped aside, keeping close watch. He moved around the cabin like he owned it, setting the folder on the table, glancing at the furniture as if appraising it. "Nice little place. Shame you are wasting your time here." I crossed my arms. "Say what you came to say." He sat tapping the folder with his fingers. "Look, Kiara, I do not care about the sentimental nonsense. The company is what matters. It is growing, expanding, worth billions in the coming years. My mother and I intend to keep it that way. If you are smart, you will hand over whatever you found. In return, we will cut you in. Cash. More than you could make in a lifetime of drawing pictures or whatever it is. You do." The insult stung, but beneath it I heard desperation. They knew something. Not everything, but enough to worry. I sat across from him, steadying my voice. And if I refuse? His smile faltered just slightly. Then my mother will crush you. She has the board in her pocket, the lawyers lined up, the press eating out of her hand. You will be painted as unstable, greedy, maybe even dangerous. He leaned closer, his eyes cold. You cannot win against her. I held his gaze, my pulse hammering. My dad had trusted me with proof. Daniel's arrogance only confirmed how powerful that proof was. I wanted to throw the folder back at him, to tell him I had more strength than he could imagine. But something in me whispered to wait, to let him think I was cornered. I stood walking to the window, giving myself a moment. The forest stretched beyond, vast and quiet, grounding me. When I turned back, I said evenly, I'm not afraid of your mother. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. He gathered his folder quickly, muttering, you will regret this, and left without another word. I watched his car disappear down the path, my hands shaking. That night, I lit a fire and sat with the quilt pulled tight around me. The confrontation had rattled me, but it had also revealed something critical. They were not as secure as they pretended. If they had been, they would not waste their time trying to scare me into surrender. They feared the truth I held. I took the box out again, laying the papers across the table. My dad's signatures gleamed under the lamplight. The shares, the deeds, the transcripts. Each page was a weapon. But weapons needed strategy. I thought of Eleanor, her calm voice on the phone. Perhaps it was time to bring her in, to see if the law could protect what I had. Still doubt gnawed at me. What if she betrayed me? What if Vivian reached her first? My chest tightened as I imagined being dragged into court with nothing. Painted as a liar, the cabin stripped bare. I pressed my palms flat on the table and whispered to the empty room, I will not let that happen. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The forest groaned like it too carried secrets. I packed the documents away, returning the box to its hiding place. My dad's words echoed again, protect what mattered most. I knew then that the battle had begun, and there was no turning back. When the letter from the court arrived, I knew the time for hiding was over. It was a summons, crisp and official, stating that Vivian Carter had filed suit to contest my claim to any part of my dad's estate. I sat at the kitchen table in the cabin, staring at the document, the black ink blurring as my eyes filled with tears. Fear pressed against my ribs, but underneath it, a stronger feeling rose, the same determination that had kept me alive this long. They wanted to drag me into the open and humiliate me in front of the world. They thought I would crumble. They did not know how much fight I had left. I called Eleanor Hayes that same afternoon. My voice shook as I told her what had come. She listened quietly, then said she would meet me in Portland the next day. She insisted I bring the documents. It was time to place them in safe legal hands. I hesitated but agreed. I could not do this alone. The drive into the city felt surreal. The forest faded in my rearview mirror as highways opened before me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the box of papers resting on the passenger seat under a blanket. Every car that passed made me nervous. I imagined Vivian's people following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. By the time I reached Eleanor's office, my nerves were raw. Eleanor greeted me at the door herself. She was in her late 50s, tall, with silver hair pulled into a low bun, her suit tailored but not flashy. Her eyes were steady, filled with a quiet strength that eased my panic a little. She led me into a conference room and closed the door behind us. I placed the box on the table and opened it slowly. As she sifted through the documents, her expression shifted from curiosity to focus to something sharper. When she finished, she looked up at me. Your dad was thorough, she said. These are valid. More than valid. They prove that he intended you to inherit nearly half the company. If we can establish the authenticity of these records in court, Vivian will have a problem she cannot smooth over with charm or money. Relief surged through me, followed quickly by dread. That is what I feared, I admitted. If she realizes what I have, she will do everything to discredit me. Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. Then we make sure she cannot. She has power, yes, but power can only stretch so far when confronted with truth. The next week unfolded like a storm gathering strength. Word spread quickly that I was contesting the will. Newspapers ran headlines about a family feud over the Rossi empire. Photographers appeared outside the courthouse, their flashes blinding as I tried to enter unnoticed. I wanted to crawl back into the cabin and never leave, but each headline, each picture of Vivian smiling like she already won, fueled my resolve. The first hearing was brutal. Vivian arrived in a tailored navy suit, her diamond earrings flashing under the lights. Daniel at her side like a loyal shadow. Their lawyers, an army of them, filled one side of the courtroom. I sat on the other side with Eleanor and her assistant. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the whole room could hear. Vivian's attorney spoke first. painting me as unstable and greedy, a woman bitter over her dad's choices, grasping at straws. He said I had broken into the cabin and stolen documents that were not mine. Each word landed like a slap, but I forced myself to sit tall. When Eleanor rose to respond, her voice was calm, cutting through the noise. She presented the documents we had authenticated, the signatures verified, the transcripts of recordings. The judge studied them carefully. Vivienne's mask cracked for just a second. I saw her hand tighten on Daniel's arm, her lips pressed together. She quickly recovered, but the moment was enough to send a spark of hope through me. After court adjourned, reporters swarmed us. Questions flew in every direction. Is it true you are suing your stepmother? Do you believe she manipulated your dad? Do you think you can win? I kept my head down, Eleanor shielding me as best she could. Still, the cameras caught my face, my unease. That night, the news ran with the story, and strangers began to recognize me on the street. Some looked at me with pity, others with curiosity. I hated the attention, but I reminded myself it meant Vivienne's grip was loosening. Back at the cabin, I lay awake listening to the wind. My life had shifted so drastically. 1 month ago, I had been invisible, discarded. Now I was a headline. The weight of it pressed heavily, but so did the thought of my dad's voice in those transcripts, his determination to protect me. The second hearing was worse. Vivienne took the stand. She spoke with practiced grace, telling the court how much she had cared for my dad, how devastated she was to see me attacking the family. She painted me as estranged, ungrateful, unstable. Her words twisted the truth until even I began to question myself. But then Eleanor played one of the recordings. My dad's voice filled the courtroom, weak but clear, speaking to a confidant about how Vivienne was pressuring him, how he feared she would take everything if he did not act. The room went silent. I saw jaws tighten, eyes widen. For the first time, Vivienne looked shaken. When court ended that day, I walked out into the flashing cameras with my chin lifted. I was still terrified, but now I had something more. I had proof that the truth was on my side. That night back at the cabin, I lit a fire and sat close to it, the warmth seeping into my bones. The fight was far from over, but I had survived the first blows. Vivienne's power was real, but so was mine. My dad's legacy was not lost. It lived in these papers, in my determination, in the quiet strength of knowing I was not as small as she wanted me to believe. I stared into the flames until the logs crumbled into glowing embers. The cabin creaked around me, old but steady. Outside, the forest whispered in the dark. For the first time since his death, I felt that my dad was with me, guiding me through the storm. The day of the board meeting arrived with a weight that pressed against my chest from the moment I woke up. I had spent weeks preparing with Eleanor, combing through every detail of the hidden documents, every clause in my dad's old contracts. The Grace Foundation plans were spread across the table in the cabin, and I had pored over them late into the night until my eyes blurred. Still, as the morning sun cut across the sky, painting the Oregon forest gold, doubt tugged at me. I was about to step into a room full of people who had known me only as a child. Many of them had chosen to believe Vivienne's story, that I was unworthy, unstable, disposable. I packed the papers into a leather folder and dressed carefully. A fitted blazer, simple pearl earrings, nothing too flashy. I wanted to look like myself, but also like someone who belonged in a room of power. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I saw my mother's face in my own, the same eyes, the same resolve. I whispered to her memory, "Stay with me today." The drive into Portland felt endless. Traffic moved in fits. My hands clenched on the steering wheel, my heart racing with every mile. I parked in a garage near the skyscraper that housed Rossi Holdings and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then I forced myself to get out, heels clicking on this concrete floor as I walked toward the elevators. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor. Glass walls framed a view of the city, the Willamette River glimmering in the distance. A long, polished table stretched across the room. At the far end sat Vivienne, elegant in a navy suit, her pearls gleaming. She looked up when I entered, her mouth curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, look who finally decided to join the grown-ups." Her voice dripped with disdain. I ignored her and took my seat beside Eleanor, who gave me a small, reassuring nod. My heart hammered, but I lifted my chin. The chairman cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss shareholder disputes, particularly the matter of Mr. Rossi's estate." Vivienne leaned forward, her tones smooth as silk. "My late husband trusted me to guide this company, and frankly, Chiara has no experience. She is driven by resentment, not vision. We cannot allow her personal grievances to damage our legacy." Anger flared in my chest, but Eleanor spoke before I could. "With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, the documents we presented to the court prove otherwise. Mr. Rossi clearly intended for his daughter to hold a significant role." I opened my folder and slid the foundation papers onto the table. These were my parents' plans, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They envisioned a foundation to support women and children, to make this company more than just profit. My dad trusted me with this cabin because it was meant to be the starting place. The room stirred. Some board members leaned forward, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Vivian's jaw tightened. She laughed softly, the sound sharp. This is sentimental nonsense. A shack in the woods and a pile of dreams. Hardly the work of real leadership. I met her gaze directly. My parents believed in this more than anything, and I will not let you erase them. Silence stretched across the table. For the first time, I saw hesitation in a few of the directors' faces. They were not immune to her charm, but cracks had begun to show. The meeting dragged on, debates rising and falling. Numbers were quoted, charts displayed, accusations whispered. Vivian tried every angle, painting me as unstable, unprepared, even dangerous. But each time Eleanor calmly countered and I held my ground. By the end, no decision was reached, but the air had shifted. I saw it in Vivian's eyes, the faint flicker of unease. She had expected me to crumble, to flee. Instead, I had stood tall and the room had seen it. Afterward, I walked out into the city air, my legs trembling. Eleanor touched my arm. You did well. They heard you. That's what matters right now. But I knew Vivian was far from finished. That night, back at this cabin, the forest wrapped around me like a shield. I lit the fire and spread the foundation documents across the table again. My mother's letter lay beside them, her words echoing in my mind. Trust in yourself. You are stronger than you know. I whispered into the fire, I will not let her win. The flames crackled, shadows dancing across the wooden walls. The battle was only beginning, but for the first time, I felt the tide beginning to turn. And yet deep in my chest, a new fear stirred. Because Vivian, when cornered, would strike harder, and I had no idea what her next move would be. The day of the board meeting arrived with the weight of a storm pressing against my chest. I had barely slept the night before, pacing the floor of the cabin, reading and rereading my dad's documents until the words blurred into one another. Everything depended on this moment. If I faltered, Vivian would walk away triumphant, her power secured. If I held steady, the truth might finally break through the web she had spun for years. The Rossi Real Estate Group headquarters in Seattle was a towering glass building that seemed to pierce the clouds. As I stood outside its doors, briefcase in hand, my legs trembled. I forced myself to breathe. I was not the broken girl she had mocked at the will reading. I was my dad's daughter, holding his legacy in my grasp. Inside the lobby, polished marble floors gleamed beneath the light of crystal chandeliers. My heels clicked as I walked toward the elevators, the sound echoing too loudly in my ears. Eleanor was already waiting upstairs, her calm presence a steadying anchor. She greeted me with a small nod, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. You are ready, she said softly. I nodded, even though my throat felt tight. The boardroom was vast, with a long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. Around the table sat the company's directors, most of them men in tailored suits, their faces guarded. At the far end sat Vivian, draped in an emerald green suit, her diamond earrings catching the light. Daniel sat beside her, tapping a pen impatiently, his eyes flicking to me with disdain. As I entered, conversation hushed. Vivian's smile was sharp, practiced. Well, Kiara, she said smoothly, what a surprise to see you here. Come to watch real business in action. I met her gaze and forced myself not to flinch. I came to take my rightful place, I answered. Murmurs rippled down the table. The chairman, an older man named Robert Caldwell, cleared his throat. Let us proceed, he said. Mrs. Carter, you requested this emergency session. Please explain. Vivian rose gracefully, her voice carrying with ease. She spoke of stability, of protecting the company from reckless hands. She painted me as unstable again, a girl clinging to fantasies, a distraction from real progress. Daniel chimed in with smug remarks about innovation and leadership, both aimed to sideline me. When Eleanor stood, the room shifted. She placed the briefcase on the table and opened it, sliding out the documents. With steady hands, she presented the deeds, the shares, the transcripts of my dad's words. She explained how they had been authenticated, how they proved his intent beyond doubt. The room fell silent as my dad's voice crackled through a recording, weak but resolute, naming me as the one he trusted with his legacy. I watched Vivian's face. For a moment, her poise faltered. Her hand clenched around the edge of the table, her eyes flicking sharply toward me. She recovered quickly, forcing a smile, but the crack had appeared. One of the directors leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. If this is legitimate, he said, then nearly half the company belongs to Kiara. This changes everything. Daniel slammed his pen on the table. This is absurd. Those documents could have been forged. She probably broke into my dad's study and stole them. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice calm. My dad left them for me. He hid them because he knew you and your mother would twist his final wishes. The board erupted in murmurs. Vivian stood again, her voice sharper now. Do not be fooled by this performance. Kiara is grasping at straws. My husband's real will was read by the court. That is what stands. Eleanor's voice cut through. The court will decide yes, but in the meantime, the board must consider what is at stake. Do you want leadership tainted by scandal, by the possibility of fraud? Or do you want to honor the man who built this company from the ground up? The directors shifted uncomfortably. Robert Caldwell cleared his throat again, his eyes moving between us. We will review the evidence in full, he said. But know this, Mrs. Carter. If even part of this is true, your position is not as secure as you think. Vivian's jaw tightened. She gathered her papers abruptly, signaling to Daniel. This is not over, she hissed, her eyes locked on me. When the meeting adjourned, I walked out into the cool Seattle air, my heart racing. The city buzzed around me, cars honking, people hurrying down sidewalks. For the first time since my dad's death, I felt the tide beginning to turn. That evening, I returned to the cabin, exhaustion washing over me. I lit a fire and sank into the couch, the quilt pulled around my shoulders. The crackle of flames filled the silence. I thought of Vivian's face when the recording played, the way her mask had cracked. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I reached under the floorboards, running my fingers over the box. My dad had trusted me with his secrets, and now they were burning holes in the foundation of everything Vivian had built. I leaned back, staring into the flames, my chest tight with a mix of fear and triumph. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I believed I could win. The cabin no longer felt like a hiding place. By the time autumn leaves began to fall in Mount Hood, it had become the center of my strength. I woke each morning with a new rhythm, rising before the sun, making coffee on the old stove, and planning each small step of the Grace Foundation. I scrubbed the walls until they gleamed, replaced worn curtains with bright ones I sewed by hand, and set up shelves for books and supplies. For the first time in years, I felt as though I was building something that was mine, something no one could take away. Eleanor visited often to help with paperwork. She would drive from Seattle, bringing her briefcase and her calm assurance. She guided me through forms that would register the foundation as a legal entity, explained the importance of bylaws and financial accountability, and reminded me gently that Vivian would fight harder when she learned of it. I listened carefully, my pen scratching across paper, my heart swelling with each document we signed. Every page was another brick in the fortress I was building. One morning, Martha Green knocked on my door. She carried a pie in one hand and a stack of old photographs in the other. I had not seen her since she testified in court, her courage helping to crack Vivian's carefully polished lies. She stepped inside with tears in her eyes, saying she had gone through her boxes and found pictures of my mother. Together, we spread them across the table. There was my mother in her classroom, chalk on her fingers. There she was standing in the forest, near the cabin, hair wild in the wind, laughing. The images filled the room with warmth. Martha touched my arm. Grace wanted the world to be better, Kiara. If you are reviving her dream, you are giving her back to all of us. I could not hold back the tears. I hugged Martha tightly and promised her that the Grace Foundation would live. As weeks passed, I began contacting local organizations, shelters, and community groups. At first, I was nervous, unsure whether anyone would take me seriously. But each call brought encouragement. A women's shelter in Portland offered to donate supplies. A small church group pledged volunteers. Even a local carpenter, after hearing my story in the paper, drove up to the cabin with lumber and tools, insisting on helping with repairs. Slowly, the cabin transformed into more than a personal refuge. It became a place alive with possibility. But the shadow of Vivian never disappeared. Every headline about the court battle reminded me she was still out there, spinning her story, trying to paint me as unstable. One evening, I turned on the television to see her being interviewed. Her voice honeyed as she claimed she had tried to care for me, but that I had turned bitter and vengeful. I gripped the arm of the couch, fury burning in my chest. She was still trying to erase me, but now I had more than anger. I had purpose. Eleanor called the next morning with news. The judge had ruled that the documents we presented would stand for review. It meant I was officially recognized as a major shareholder in the company until the case concluded. My knees buckled when I heard the words. I sat down on the porch steps, staring at the forest as tears blurred my vision. For months I had fought to prove I was not trash, that I mattered. And now, at least in the eyes of the court, I had been heard. Still, victory felt fragile. Eleanor reminded me that Vivian would appeal, would throw every resource at me. The battle was not over. But I was not the same woman who had walked away from the mansion empty-handed. I was stronger, anchored not only in my dad's trust, but in my mother's dream. That afternoon, I worked late into the evening, painting the cabin's front door a bright shade of blue. When I stepped back to look at it under the fading light, my chest filled with pride. This place, once mocked as worthless, now stood as a symbol of survival. I whispered into the cool air. "You tried to bury me here, Vivian, but instead you gave me ground to grow." Inside, I opened the wooden box I had found hidden behind the fireplace stone. My mother's letter lay on top, her handwriting, graceful, her words etched into my heart. Beneath it were the foundation's early plans. I traced the lines of her careful notes, the budget columns my dad had helped her draft, the mission she had written in bold letters. To provide dignity and safety for those the world has discarded. I read it aloud to myself, letting the words sink deep. The next day, I drove into Portland for a meeting with the bank. The accounts my parents had set aside for the foundation were still intact, untouched for over a decade. The banker explained how the funds had grown modestly with interest. It was not millions, but it was enough to begin. I signed the necessary forms, my hand steady, my heart racing. When I left the building, the autumn wind swept through the streets, carrying with it the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. For the first time, I felt the future pressing forward, wide and real. When I returned to the cabin that evening, the air was sharp with the scent of pine. I carried supplies from the car and set them on the porch. The forest was quiet, the sky painted pink and gold. I stood there for a long time watching the light fade, thinking of everything that had led me here. The humiliation at the will, reading Vivian's cruel words, the lonely nights when I thought I was finished. All of it had brought me to this moment, where I was building something bigger than revenge. As darkness settled, I lit the fire inside. Flames flickered across the cabin walls, warm and steady. I sat at the table, my mother's photograph spread before me, her letter close to my heart. The crackle of wood filled the silence, and for the first time in years, I felt peace slip into my bones. The fight with Vivian was far from over. The courts would drag on, the company's board would debate, and reporters would twist the story into endless headlines. But here within these wooden walls, I had already won something she could never take. I had reclaimed my mother's dream. I had carved out a space where her love still lived. I leaned back in the chair, staring into the fire until the flames blurred. Tomorrow there would be more work, more battles. But tonight I allowed myself to rest in the knowledge that I was no longer defined by what Vivian tried to make me. I was my mother's daughter, my dad's heir, and the guardian of a legacy too strong to be destroyed. The morning of the final hearing arrived cold and gray, the kind of sky that carried both heaviness and promise. I woke before dawn in the cabin, sitting on the edge of the bed as the fire in the stove burned low. My hands trembled slightly as I laced my shoes. This was the day that would decide not just the company or the fortune, but the truth about who my dad was and who I had become. Driving into Portland, the roads slick with mist, I thought of my mother's letter tucked safely in my bag. Her words were my shield. My dad's documents, the financial statements, the sealed files Eleanor had prepared, they were my weapons. Together, they formed an armor that no insult from Vivian could pierce. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward me. "Miss Rozzi, is it true you fabricated evidence? Are you prepared to lose everything?" I kept my head high and walked through them, ignoring the chaos. Inside the building, the air was hushed thick with anticipation. Eleanor met me at the entrance to the courtroom, her expression steady but her eyes filled with encouragement. Vivian sat already at the front table, her lawyer beside her, her suit impeccable, her hair perfect. She did not look at me when I entered, but I felt her disdain ripple across the room. For years she had believed I was beneath her, disposable. Today would test everything she had built on that arrogance. The hearing began with Vivian's lawyer presenting arguments. His voice was smooth, polished, weaving a story that painted her as the dutiful wife, the true protector of my dad's legacy. He called me reckless, ungrateful, a bitter stepdaughter seeking revenge. Each word cut at me, but I held still, my face calm. I knew what was coming. When it was Eleanor's turn, she rose with quiet authority. She spoke clearly, laying out the timeline, the documents, the inconsistencies in Vivian's story. She presented the hidden files my dad had entrusted to me, the bank statements tied to the Grace Foundation, the evidence of assets Vivian had tried to conceal. Each exhibit was passed to the judge, each detail a stone laid into the wall of truth. Then came my turn. My heart hammered as I took the stand. I breathed deeply before speaking, remembering my mother's voice. I told the court about the day of the will reading, about being mocked and cast aside. I described discovering my dad's hidden documents in the cabin, and how his words proved he had never intended to abandon me. I spoke of the grace foundation of my mother's vision, of how both my parents had believed in me. For a long moment after I finished, the room was silent. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Vivian's lawyer rose to cross-examine. He tried to rattle me, asking why I had waited so long to produce the evidence, why my dad had hidden it instead of filing it properly. I steadied my voice and answered truthfully. My dad trusted me. He believed one day I would need the strength to stand up for myself. That day is today. Vivian finally broke her silence. She stood abruptly, her voice sharp. This is outrageous! That girl is nothing! She is trash who does not deserve the Rossi name. Her outburst echoed through the chamber. Gasps filled the room. The judge banged her gavel demanding order, but the damage was done. Vivian had revealed her cruelty in full view. The judge recessed briefly before returning with her decision. My pulse roared in my ears as I waited. She spoke firmly, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The evidence presented by Miss Rossi is credible. The hidden documents verified by our experts prove intent of inheritance and share. E-distribution. Effective immediately. Chiara Rossi is recognized as rightful shareholder and beneficiary of the Grace Foundation assets. The room erupted in whispers. I felt my knees weaken. Eleanor squeezed my hand, grounding me. Across the aisle, Vivian's face twisted with fury, her mask shattered. She shouted at her lawyer, demanding appeals, but her voice sounded hollow now, stripped of authority. For the first time, I saw not the woman who had haunted me for years, but a figure crumbling under the weight of her own greed. When I left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again, but their questions were different now. Miss Rossi, how does it feel to win? What are your plans for the foundation? I paused on the steps, lifting my chin. My voice was steady. This was never only about money. It was about truth and honoring the people who loved me. I planned to build the Grace Foundation and make it a place where no one feels unwanted the way I once did. That night, I returned to the cabin. The fire glowed bright, the smell of pine heavy in the air. I placed my mother's photographs on the mantel, arranging them carefully. Her smile seemed to light the room. I sat at the table with the foundation documents spread out, ready to begin the next chapter. The cabin was no longer a symbol of exile. It was the heart of my future. I thought back to Vivian's words the day of the will reading, her sneer as she said I belonged in this shack. She had meant it as an insult. Tonight I whispered into the quiet air. You were right. I do belong here, but not as trash. As the daughter who turned this place into something unbreakable. As the flames flickered, I felt peace settle into my bones. The battle was over. Justice had found its way through lies and cruelty. My parents' voices lived on in me. And though scars remained, they no longer defined me. I was free. If you have ever felt discarded or underestimated, if you have been told you were less than you are, I hope my story speaks to you. I hope you find the strength to stand up and create something no one can take from you. Tell me in the comments if you have faced moments where you reclaimed your power. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. Together we can make sure no one's voice is ever erased again.